Hey, and welcome back to Neuropsychology. So in the last video, we talked about the hippocampus and its relationship to spatial navigation. So we talked about this really cool study that was done in London taxi drivers and bus drivers, and how taxi drivers had a larger hippocampus in volume. And we also talked about 3 special hippocampal cells, specifically place cells, head direction cells, and grid cells. In this video, we're going to talk about neuropsychological tests of behaviors, specifically the visualization tests, orientation tests, and boundary expansion test, or boundary expansion. We're also going to talk about hemispatial neglect, and lastly about Balint's syndrome. Okay, so tests used for measuring human spatial abilities can vary from tests of real-world spatial abilities to virtual tests or even computer simulations of spatial tasks. So visualization tests evaluate the ability to manipulate, rotate, twist, or invert 2- or 3-dimensional stimulus object mentally. So to do this, you need to rely on a process of recognition and retention and recall of a configuration whose parts move and change place. So for example, when an object is manipulated in 3-dimensional space, or a flat paper is folded and unfolded. So an example of that is A right here. So if you have a paper, and if you would fold it like that, where the fold is right here, and if you would punch a hole through that, which one of these is the same paper, or which one of these would represent that? So if you unfold it, it would be this one, right? So this is a visualization test. So orientation tests evaluate comprehension of the arrangement of elements within a visual stimulus pattern, and to see if you don't get confused by the changing orientation in which a spatial configuration may be presented. So for example, you have a cube with letters on it, as you can see, for example, in image B. And if you rotate it, which ones of the cube is the same as this cube? So if you can rotate it, on all 3, you have the W like that, and you would have the P like this, and the Q would be on the other side, right? So it would have to be this one. So this is an example of orientation test. And boundary expansion is the expansion of the space between the object and the frame. So actually, healthy participants or healthy people have boundary expansions, and patients with amnesia do not have boundary expansion. So for example, when a participant is asked to touch an array of objects within a frame and then position the objects within the frame in a test, the control participants will expand the boundary by reducing the area in which these objects are replaced. Okay, so let's go over another example of boundary expansion. So when a participant is asked to draw a copy of a picture of, for example, and here you can see the basketball, subjects with hippocampal damage produce a way more accurate picture with no boundary expansion on the sides relative to size of the border compared to healthy people. So healthy people display boundary expansion and draw the object smaller. So as you can see, you have the ball here, and healthy people would just draw it smaller and have more boundary right here. So there's boundary expansion. So one disorder of spatial ability is hemi neglect. It is also called unilateral neglect or hemispatial neglect. So this is a common condition following brain damage to the right posterior parietal lobe. Here, patients fail to be aware of items on one side. So often they know it's there, they're just not aware of it. It's very, very strange. So if you would ask them to draw a clock, they would draw all the numbers on one side. So they would literally see this as a regular clock because they're just unaware of this entire side. Or in this picture below, where you have all the letters, if you ask someone with hemispatial neglect to circle all the A's, he will only be able to circle the A's on one side. So he's just not aware, in this case, of the left side. So this is mainly due to an injury of the right posterior parietal lobe. So hemispatial neglect is defined by the inability to process or perceive stimuli on one side of the body or environment. And this inability is not due to a lack of sensation. So the participants can see it, they're just not aware of it. So it's higher processes that are interrupted. Hemispatial neglect is more severe with damage to the right parietal cortex compared to the left side. So it has to do something with the right parietal cortex. So here you see a picture of overlap of lesions for 10 patients with hemispatial neglect, and it's all on the right side by the parietal cortex. So the neglect like this is often produced by a massive stroke in the MCA or in the middle cerebral artery. So this suggests that the right parietal cortex mediates spatial attention for both of our sides. Okay, so this is actually a really cool YouTube video. So this is a doggo or a doggy that has hemispatial neglect. So if you can, I want you to go to this link and try to watch it. And what you will see is that he only eats one side of his bowl. So if you would turn this bowl around so the food will only be in the lower part, he will only eat that little quarter of the food. So I highly recommend watching this. Okay, so the last one I want to talk about is Balint syndrome. So Balint syndrome is also a disorder of spatial ability and was first described by Dr. Balint, where he described one of his patients that had this. So Balint's patient had bilateral damage to the occipital and parietal cortex, and it included parts of the dorsal temporal lobes. So it also had a zone of unilateral damage to the dorsal parietal and motor cortex, as you can see right here. So in Balint syndrome, a patient can see and perceive an object, but he or she will not know what it is. So they can see it, they just don't know where it's located. And it's very confusing because they can talk about it and describe it, but for example, if they see a glass and they want to pour some water in the glass, it's super hard for them to know where it is. Okay, so this is the last slide for chapter 21, and I will see you guys back soon for the next video.